Hi, class. So, all in all, things are moving forward. We've seen the rise of the world's first civilizations, leading us to city-states. Historical themes have begun to emerge. Religion, rulers, kings, and elites, military, technology, innovation, food production, art, music, and so on. But now, in the second millennium BCE, civilizations that existed are going to be transformed by the arrival of new peoples, technology, and religions, and by the emergence of extensive land-based empires built up through systematic military conquest. Now, these migrations and conquests are going to cause enormous upheaval, but they also lead to some cultural contacts, social and economic integration. So this movement is taking place from the Mediterranean region all the way over to China. And so the last few years of what scholars call the Bronze Age were intense. Iron will replace bronze, larger and more brutal regimes will begin to rule, and the rise of great religions is upon us. It's going to turn society on its head. But why did all of this happen? Class, this is a period of severe environmental warming and drying, and exerts a lot of strains on the major settled societies of places like Egypt and the Mesopotamia, and again all the way over to China. Famine will sweep the land, and this leads to not only widespread suffering, but pressure on governing structures of the city-states. So besides the usual internal problems a city-state might have and division, now you're going to have external problems really building up. The environmental change, decreased agricultural production. Of course, this is going to caused by the drought. This is going to cause great famine, but it's also going to create deeper anxiety that the natural order has been upended. The gods are angry with us. So what are we going to do about it? Populations of these transhuman herders and pastoral nomads living in close proximity to the city-states were also very hard hit by the changing climate. And so increasingly, they began to infringe on these city-state lands in search of natural resources like water and better grazing land. And while this led to some unprecedented challenges for the ruling class of these city-states, it also spurs adaptation and innovation. The city-states assimilated with some of these outsiders into their social structure, as well as adopted some military techniques and technology to make war. Above all, this included the horse-drawn chariot. That changes everything. It really introduced a huge change in warfare on the plains of Afro-Eurasia for the next 500 plus years. But movement of people is also going to bring along different things like religious practices and different languages and put a lot of pressure on the city-state citizens. The new and transformed societies that will emerge after this intermingling begins to ultimately establish a more comprehensive territorial type state. Rule over bigger and bigger territories became the norm. The city-state elites called those who clashed with them barbarians, but they were anything but barbaric. So the first wave of civilizations in places like the Mesopotamia and Egypt had really generated impressive and powerful societies that we've talked about. But class, they proved to be somewhat fragile. Remember, they were often quarreling with themselves and the gods. So let's see who rises from the first powerful city-states to become even more powerful. This incursion of nomadic warfare had profound effects on geopolitics. Older city-states increasingly will give way to more expansive territorial states, which could more effectively establish sovereignty over far larger reaching hinterlands than ever before. So in addition to military and transportation technology, These new territorial states are going to maintain control over larger populations and across generations through several different innovations. New rituals were devised to organize the transmission of power from one generation of a ruling class to another. Power was concentrated in these charismatic rulers who became a reference point for large populations to identify with. Rather than think of one's identity within the confines of just the city, people could increasingly identify with these rulers, their larger territory, linguistic and ethnic boundaries of their own community. Deriving their strength in part from this enlarged and strengthened identity of their residents, territorial states began to assert authority in places like Egypt, the Mesopotamia region, all the way over to China over the course of the second millennium BCE. And these new territorial states are going to differ in several fundamental ways from the earlier city-states. Territorial states concentrated power, again, in charismatic leaders who transmitted power from one generation to the next. And they're going to develop these widespread bureaucracies to manage affairs and maintain order over larger distances. And these bureaucratic type individuals are going to help maintain the more elaborate legal codes instituted in territorial states. So it's going to look different than a city-state. It's going to be a lot more complex. And these territorial states are really going to play a big importance over defined boundaries. They're also going to look at their legal and bureaucratic system to enforce their plans for continuous expansion. Class, this becomes the modus operandi of a well-run territorial state, constant, continuous expansion. So, for example, places like the Mesopotamia were conquered by the Amorites. These guys had aligned themselves with the Elamites, and they established the first Babylonian dynasty, also known as the Old Babylonian Kingdom. Now, in this new political order, the Amorites were previously herders and shepherds, and they became urban rulers and instituted a new social and political organization that fused their nomadic traditions with those of the former city-states. The Amorites' social organization was tribal, led by a chief, and clan-based, meaning it was claimed descendant from a shared ancestor. This system of rule transitioned to rule by a charismatic, hereditary king who grew their power and passed it on to their children or heirs. They were able to enhance authority by collaborating with the merchant class, religious leaders, and other elites who provided support for their rule. Now, the most successful of these kings from the Amorites were able to expand their territory by conquering weaker neighbors, and their weaker polities were then incorporated as tributaries. They paid tributes of luxury goods and raw materials and manpower even to the new Mesopotamia kings. The key feature that enables rulers to expand was the effective control of military resources such as metal and horses, and also, again, that strategic use of charisma. Class, Babylon will grow into one of the largest cities of the ancient world under the rule of Hammurabi. Hammurabi, he ruled the Mesopotamia during the first half of the 18th century BCE, and in this time he sought both to expand state power against weaker neighbors and to centralize internal authority through the development of a new legal code. This is how he's going to do it, and this code served to bolster his power and enable him to manage this expanding kingdom with its political capital in Babylon. The self-image he developed was modeled on the rule of Egyptian pharaohs in the Middle Kingdom. The king would be the patriarch or the supreme father figure, but also the shepherd to the flock, responsible for their prosperity and well-being. To enshrine this, he created Hammurabi's Code. It's going to depict him as a just ruler protecting divinely ordained laws. These laws emphasize the king's control and responsibility for the maintenance of justice and order. And this code also organizes society, social, and family relations. It specified the rights and privileges of different family members, fathers, wives, children, and social classes. And it was all divided up into 3 main classes: free men, dependent men, and slaves. He set the standard class for many rulers to follow. Too bad it was harsh and an unequal code, right? The code was set up for the law of retaliation, or ley talionis, an eye for an eye. I'm sure you've heard of that. Unless you were of high standing, and then the eye for an eye didn't apply. Class, according to Hammurabi, the gods chose him. He claimed he was chosen to do this, and I quote, promote welfare of the people, to cause justice, and to destroy the wicked and the evil. How can you argue with that? He and his descendants ruled over 155 years until they fell to the Hittites from Anatolia, or Turkey, present-day Turkey. Truly, the Code of Hammurabi was etched in stone on a 7-foot-tall basalt stele, which you can go visit today in the Louvre in Paris. I have personally seen it, been fortunate enough to go there, and it is incredible. So on the vast plains of Anatolia, various chariot warrior groups build these fortified settlements and engage in regional warfare in the first centuries of the 2nd millennium BCE. And chief among those were the Hittites, who established the dominant territorial kingdom in Anatolia. Anatolia was crucial overland crossroads between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, and its flat expanses made travel over it very easy. It was a very important trade route. The growth of Hittite power in the early 2nd millennium saw their expansion and conquest of weaker neighbors, and as in the Mesopotamia region, these conquered peoples then became a source of tax revenue and tributes. Hattusilus I was the Hittite ruler who defeated competing chariot warrior groups and unified these separate aristocracies under his rule. In addition to his campaign in Anatolia, he pushed southeastward and into northern Syria, and he eventually sacked Babylon in 1595 BCE, and afterwards a succession of kings followed. Hattusilus worshipped Ishtar, the Babylonian goddess of fertility, love, storms, and war, and is arguably the most important mother goddess of the Mesopotamia region. She bears the title Queen of Heaven. Centuries later, in around 1275 BCE, the Hittites engaged in the largest chariot battle in recorded history class against the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II at the Battle of Kadesh. And in a broad geopolitical sense, during this half millennium, the rise of the Hittite power was essential to maintaining the balance of power among territorial states in this region. And listen, this is a very typical territorial state. Chariot society, militaristic, charismatic leaders constantly on the move for more land and resources. Class, I've mentioned this museum before, but I want to suggest that again, if you get a chance one day and you're able to do so, let me recommend the Museum of Natural History in Anniston, along with the Burma Museum of Weapons right next door. There are some pretty incredible artifacts there. And right here in Alabama, just a few minutes from Birmingham, you can see things from mummies to ancient weapons, and I really think you would enjoy it. So if you get a chance, go. As usual, class, keep in touch.